Here is the voice of the working class, Rick Smith.
And welcome, brothers, sisters, working class heroes. This is the Rick Smith Show. Thanks so much for being here today on the big program. Lots to get to, lots to talk about. President gave a presentation today talking about the Inflation Reduction Act, the jobs, and I love the fact that he says when I think climate, I think jobs. That's the reality. It's something I've been saying for a very long time. The new economy, climate, jobs. That's the reality of the place we're in. And look, the president talked about a lot of the successes of the IRA and the fact that we're doing a bunch of really positive stuff. The weird thing is, and this is one of the things that's, again, we have a right-wing media that is extraordinarily powerful, pointing out all of the things that are wrong, all of the things. You have no idea how many people today emailed me and said, well, Rick, inflation's still a problem. Rick, people are going homeless. Suicide rates are higher. Homelessness is higher. All this bad stuff's higher. And I'm going, yeah, it is. I agree. How do we fix it? How do we do it? And again, these are my conservative listeners who are saying, look, there are all these problems. No solutions. And this is the frustration of this moment because, look, I think the president is moving us in a very positive direction. I think we're heading in the right direction. We're reshoring manufacturing. We're bringing back strategic industrial policies that we haven't had in a very long time. And as he tweeted out today, he said Bidenomics is a stark contrast with trickle-down economics, which says it doesn't matter where companies make things as long as it helps their bottom line. For me, the fact that the president knows that, the fact that during his speech he said, look, a lot of this investment is going into those places that we went to back in October and November. A lot of the places that have been forgotten, that are struggling, where, yes, opioid addiction is a serious problem, where, yes, families have been broken because of corporate America seeking out the cheapest, most exploitable labor. And, oh, by the way, mass subsidies from foreign governments. The fact that he gets that and is moving us in a different direction is an incredibly large ray of hope for me. We are turning the page on neoliberalism. We're turning the page on, and it's not going to happen overnight. This is where I keep coming back to. Yeah, all of these problems exist, which is why he's not getting the credit that he probably should be getting for making this move, because people are still struggling. Grocery prices are still high. Gas prices are too high. Wages aren't high enough, aren't rising fast enough. Yeah, those are all realities of the world that we're in. The question then comes, how do we fix that? And where the politics in this comes to play, because again, I go back to 8th grade and my government teacher, government decides who gets what. Now you have one party who says government should do nothing. We should leave it up to chance. We should leave it up to the invisible hand. We should leave it up to mythical forces, whatever. However you want to frame that, we should leave it up to nobody. And you've got what Biden is doing and what worked in the 40s, 50s, 60s, an industrial plan. When government invests in things and says, hey, we're going in a direction, you see an increase in jobs and employment. You see an increase in wages. You see when policy moves in the right direction, lives get better. What got us to the point where we're at right now is we're in this weird moment where we're fighting to get away from all of the invisible thinking. Well, the free market will take care of it. Well, the free market does one thing efficiently. It creates profit because it kills wages, kills benefits, it chews people up and spits them out. And look, the frustration and the anger is real. And this is what, I have people who say, well, you're a Biden cheerleader, when he's right. And when I think he's doing the right thing. Now, remember, you go back to the Trump years. When I thought he did something right, I gave him credit for it. The tariffs on China, yeah. Talking about the fact that China's eaten our lunch. Absolutely. Wanting to bring jobs back in manufacturing without question. But what I find really interesting is that my friends on the right cannot do the same. You can't reciprocate because Biden is doing all the things that Trump talked about, only has a plan, has as a way forward, and things are moving in the right direction, I think. Now, I find it very interesting that on the anniversary of the Inflation Reduction Act, you've got someone like Joe Manchin coming out and saying, he's going to fight the radical climate agenda. And, and that's interesting considering, what's happening in Hawaii right now. It's interesting when you start looking at some of the other things that are going on to still have your head kind of in the sand on this issue. But it's also really interesting because there are manufacturing plants being built in West Virginia that are doing wind turbines and solar panels and doing things that are going to employ people in his state. Find it interesting. And this is where I come back to politics matters. We are on what I think is the right path. Is everything perfect? No. Biden didn't have the opportunity. Someone emailed me today and said, we gave Democrats all the power for 2 years. And, did they pass a minimum wage increase? Did they do all these things? And I'm going, you gave them what power? You do understand that the Senate is where all good ideas go to die. That the House did pass all of the things that you wanted. All of the things that this person who emailed me laid out, healthcare, education funding, minimum wage, all of this stuff, top to bottom. The Democratic House passed. It went to the Senate to die. The Inflation Reduction Act was much chunkier, was much bigger, was what I was saying we needed. We need healthy investment. But we got the little that we got because of compromise. Because you had to deal with Joe Manchin and Kirsten Sinema and the like. So this idea, and this is where the simplistic bothers me. Well, the Democrats were in charge of everything. Yeah, but they didn't have 60 votes in the Senate. And again, I go back to, that's where good ideas go to die. That's where progress goes to die. That's where the stuff for you and me, for working people, that's where it goes to die. Now, would Biden have loved to have had a much bigger? Absolutely. Would have loved to have had a much bigger impact on climate. Would have loved to have had much more access to infrastructure spending. Would have loved to have done more of that stuff. But we got what we got. And I'll tell you, it's remarkable what he was able to accomplish. But I come back to all of the attacks on him, I think are mostly unfounded. Yeah, I understand. Rent prices are through the roof. How is that Biden's fault? Did we all of a sudden nationalize all of the rental units? Food prices are up. Grocery prices are up. Did we nationalize the grocery stores? And he talked about this today in his little talk on the anniversary of the Inflation Reduction Act, that corporate profits are coming down, which is why things are stabilizing. Why inflation is really coming down is corporate profits are coming back into line. And as I was saying all during the last couple of years, the pain and the suffering that we as consumers are struggling under is because we've got to feed the mighty investor class. We've got to feed the profit monster. And they were honest about it. If you listened to their earnings calls, they were quite honest. They were raising prices, not because they had to, not because their costs had gone up, not because labor costs were through the roof or any of that. They were raising it. Why? Because they could. There was a good opportunity to cash in. And of course, blame Biden, blame the pandemic, blame everybody, but their greed. And you go, but Rick, corporate America's always been greedy. Yeah, I understand that. Which is why when you have policies in place to tax the you-know-what out of them, maybe that doesn't happen. But we couldn't get that, couldn't do that. So for me, I look at where we are with a moment of hope. but also understanding people are struggling. The pain, the suffering, the anger, it's real, and you can't deny it. You've got to embrace it. You've got to grab a hold of it, and you've got to move forward with it and address it. And the person who addresses it, that's who's going to win elections. And I think that's what Biden's trying to do. I want to hear your thoughts, though. Email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Going to take a quick break. Right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show.
We are AFGE, the American Federation of Government Employees. We represent 700,000 federal and D.C. government workers who are the vital threads of the fabric of American life. We support our nation's military. We take care of our nation's veterans. We protect our nation's borders. We respond to our nation's crises and natural disasters. We provide services to our nation's seniors. The American Federation of Government Employees. We work for America.
The phone lines are open. Give Rick a call at 1-866-416-RICK. That's 1-866-416-7425.
We are AFGE, the American Federation of Government Employees. We represent 700,000 federal and D.C. government workers who are the vital threads of the fabric of American life. We support our nation's military. We take care of our nation's veterans. We protect our nation's borders. We respond to our nation's crises and natural disasters. We provide services to our nation's seniors. The American Federation of Government Employees. We work for America.
Welcome back to The Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So earlier today, I happened to see Glenn Beck. Glenn Beck threw a hissy fit. Evidently, his podcast was taken off of Apple, iTunes, and understand Apple and iTunes. That is the podcast host. You know, if you're off that, you're nowhere. So immediately it was, and you knew this is what it was going to be. Immediately it was, I'm the victim. They're silencing me. They're coming for me. It's the government who's silencing me. And look, no one plays a victim like a conservative. Nobody does the poor, pitiful me. No one. Now, understand, these are the very people who tell us, private interest, private business can do whatever they want in denying those people cakes or websites. But when private business says, no, I think you're crazy, I don't think we want you on our platform, then it becomes, it's the government coming for us. Because private decisions then aren't really private. And when I saw this, I'm going, look, as someone who posts our podcast on Apple, there have been times throughout the years where I've gotten hey, there's something wrong, jump through these hoops. There's all this stuff that, potentially is there. And so my mind goes, I really suck at playing the victim, because every time that happens, or the one time that I forgot to pay the $99 for the year to be able to post, and I thought that's probably what he did. Probably thought he didn't have to pay the $99, and they said, we want our money, because it's all about money. But I thought about this and I go, man, I don't play the victim well. I could have easily come out, they're silencing me. And he got a lot of play with this. The right wing's losing their minds. And, I had this whole thought of, maybe maybe iTunes, maybe they're trying to clean up their mess. Because I found it interesting. He tweeted something out the other day that caught my attention. He says, I'm seeing the government do things I've never seen in my 40 plus years of broadcasting. People have been mailed credible threats to presidents for years. They've rightly been investigated for it, but I've never seen the FBI gun anyone down for it ever. This is not normal. It's not normal barricading yourself in the house and pointing your gun at an FBI agent. That's not normal. But what got my attention is, maybe, and this is where I was going, possibly, who knows? Maybe iTunes is going, we want people not on our platform who promote this anger, who ramp people up into these rages to where they're ready to take out a gun and go do who knows what. And, because so there was a moment of hope that I'm going, no, maybe there's a good reason. and it was just a normal glitch. But he got his name out there, and I got to give him credit. He sure knows how to play. Let's go to the phones. Got Alice on one. Alice, how are you?
Totally insane. So I read an article that a friend of mine shared on Facebook that basically she had shared it saying, this is what these people believe. And the article was written by a Christian evangelical pastor who also does, he's a therapist, a Christian therapist.
None of this is telling me we're going in a good direction.
Yeah. So it started out, he was saying that he believed that borderline personality disorder is not a mental illness, but the person has been possessed by the demon of Jezebel.
Yeah, here we go again.
And that they basically needed to be delivered with prayer and whatnot by the church. And then he went on saying how the liberals in the Democratic Party are all possessed by demons and are mentally ill. And I thought, really? Y'all are the crazy ones if you think that people that have borderline personality disorder are possessed by demons. And now you're saying the entire Democratic Party is possessed by demons. And then it led again then into what they were doing to the Christians and the right wing and on and on. And I was just amazed that this guy wasn't put in a mental hospital somewhere.
Like I said, nobody plays the victim like a conservative.
Oh, especially if they're an evangelical one.
Yeah,
They're even worse.
Yeah, nothing surprising.
But have a good evening, Rick.
Thanks, Alice. Appreciate it. No, am I surprised by this? No, not even a little bit. And this is, this is the moment where the sane and the rational have to say enough is enough. We played that clip of the pastor, last week, and you go, what is it about people that would sit and listen to the kind of stuff that this guy was spewing? It's quite remarkable. Let's go to the phones. I got Steve in Chicago on line one. Steve, how are you?
Fine, thank you. So hang on for 1 second. I'm just getting in the car, and I'm beeping away here. But I wanted to make the point that for a lot of people out there who want to fall back on the notion that they have some sort of credentials, and this is what this caller was referring to, is a classic example in which somebody is abusing the credentials that they may or may not have in order to promote an ideology which is in no way supported by the people in their own field. So be careful. If somebody tells you, if somebody with a biology degree tells you that evolution is in question, and it's not anything that's definitively been demonstrated to be scientifically based truth, then you need to start asking yourself about what their motives might be. The same thing with regard to the germ theory of disease, and certainly with regard to what she was alluding to in terms of diagnosing people as being possessed by any sort of supernatural power. I'm sorry, you can look it up in the DSM, people. That's the Bible of what psychiatry and psychology use to diagnose how we think and those things that are dysfunctional about us and diseased and so forth in terms of our minds. There is nothing in there that attributes any of that to anything supernatural. So if somebody tells you that they have a degree and then goes on to spout something like that, it means that they are lying to you, that the people in their own field do not support this position. And so by all means, challenge that view.
Yeah.
So,
but don't you think in this moment, Steve,
people, as I said,
if I could cut you off for a second, don't you think, though, that, especially on the right and some on the left, that there are personalities that they want to know something that nobody else does. They want to be special. And that this whatever twisted view, whether you're selling, silver to stop COVID or, whatever scheme you come up with, it's about you being special and everybody else being wrong. that you're the authority, you're the only one. And do you see that as part of this as well?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, there a couple of psychologists came up with this theory called the Dunning-Kruger effect. Basically, the dumbest people in the world are absolutely the most certain that they are absolutely correct about everything. And what you find among people who are actually better educated and more intelligent is that they're constantly questioning the things that they feel are true, and that they're reasonably certain about, because they know that there is no absolute truth. I hold 3 degrees, including a doctorate, and I have answered, for every question I've answered, I have 10 more that I can't answer. And then I will meet people constantly who will tell me that, all that's a lot of nonsense. Life's really simple. You don't need to read all those books or study all these things. And, I can pretty much tell you exactly how the world works over a couple of beers in a bar. I mean, this is the ridiculous idea that people get into their heads. And you're absolutely right that some people just feel a need to validate their existence. And they're like a Donald Trump. He is the living embodiment of that. He honestly believes that he knows more than everyone at the State Department, than everybody at the Pentagon, at the National Institutes of Health. You name it, Donald Trump knows more than they do. And most of the time it's sort of laughable. But when somebody has power and they have this view of the world, it becomes very dangerous.
Yep. No, in fact, I was just having this conversation with my son, because he's just a teenager, and I said, when I was your age, I knew everything. You could ask me, I'd have known it. I knew it all. And the older I got, the dumber I got, the more I realized I don't really know anything.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I always find it interesting because every year there are a bunch of college kids who come home after a semester of having studied political science, sociology, psychology. They've read their first textbook, and they come home and start to analyze their parents and start to tell us exactly why the world works the way that it does, because they've got the answer. Yeah, you've got the answer until the next semester when you're going to read another set of books that will give you a different set of answers. And then next year you'll have another one, and another one. That's the nature of knowledge. Knowledge is complex, and the world is complex. And nobody has got all the answers.
Yep. You're spot on. Steve, I appreciate the thoughts, man. Good stuff.
Thank you.
No, look, he's spot on. And I know probably 100 people like this, which is why on the right, that you'll hear, I look at the Prager stuff, which is, simplistic, which is, very, very pointed in a direction, very narrow. And again, back to very simplistic. Feeding the narrative that they want, the rewriting of history, if you will. Because you can't make things complex. And where I keep saying, look, I had someone say, well, do you want your kids to see the Prager University stuff? I go, yeah, I actually, I showed my son the Prager kid stuff. And we had a conversation about what's wrong with it. We had a conversation of how crazy it is. And it was him bringing that up. I think you have to expose this kind of stuff, and in an environment where you can have actual people who know what's going on. And that's why the assault on education and what's going on is so important. But I appreciate the calls. I got to take a quick break. When I come back, Doug Jones is going to be here, former Alabama senator, to share some thoughts on the anniversary of the Inflation Reduction Act, also the Trump thing. You may have heard, the fourth indictment. He's hit for the cycle. Quick break. Right back. I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 2012. That was the day a release of flammable vapor led to a fire at the Chevron refinery in Richmond, California. A level 3 community warning system alert was issued for the cities of Richmond, San Paulo, and North Richmond. Toxic black smoke could be seen for miles while the fire burned for hours. 19 workers were nearly incinerated trying to escape the fire. More than 15,000 area residents sought medical treatment for chest pains, breathing problems, headaches, and sore throats. The Chemical Safety Board found that the release was caused by a leaking pipe that eventually ruptured. The pipe, made of carbon steel, suffered sulfidec corrosion. The Chemical Safety Board noted that for 40 years, the refinery industry had known that carbon steel corrodes at a much faster rate than higher chromium content steel pipe. The pipe in question had no shutoff valve to isolate the leak. In its final report, the Chemical Safety Board issued a number of findings. They found that Chevron knew of the corrosion but did nothing to prevent it. As well, Chevron not only failed to perform 100% component inspections, but it also rejected earlier recommendations to inspect and replace the pipe that would eventually fail. When it came to emergency response, Chevron failed to identify and communicate process controls or damage mechanisms in the incident command structure. They also had no leak response guidance or formal protocol to determine how to handle a process leak. The Chemical Safety Board found the safety culture lacking. Workers were reluctant to use their stop work authority and were often encouraged to continue operations despite hazardous conditions. The Chemical Safety Board issued a number of recommendations, including more stringent regulatory enforcement. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com.
Ohio voters scored a big election victory for women's rights last week. It was a tricky vote, too, deceptively couched as a statewide referendum to approve a little technical change in the procedure for approving statewide referendums. How boring. But Ohioans figured out that it really was a big vote on an underhanded ploy by right-wing Republicans to block the right of women to make their own reproductive decisions. Not boring. So, in a huge turnout, a whopping 57% of voters said yes to women and no to the tricksters. Yet the referendum actually did encompass a procedural issue that's an even bigger political story than the election results, namely, the GOP's ongoing attempts to rig election rules so its extremist minority can, quote, win without getting a majority of the votes. Background. A state constitutional amendment guaranteeing the right to abortion is already set to be voted on this November in Ohio. Right-wing Republican leaders, though, fear that more than half of Ohioans will support that amendment. Thus, last week's referendum was their desperate attempt to win by losing, specifically by decreeing that, hocus pocus, constitutional initiatives must get 60% approval to become law. Yes, a 40% minority of voters could nullify the majority will of the people. This is Jim Hightower saying this gaming of the system by devious Republican officials and far-right extremists has become their core political strategy across the country. It's actually a deeply embarrassing admission by them. They are conceding that they are now captives of ideological extremism and outright nutballism, making their party so completely out of touch with the American majority that they can't win honestly. So they've become the anti-democracy party, acting as rabid political veterinarians out to fix democracy by neutering the power of the people.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So, a new AP NORC poll out. They say 35% of Americans have a favorable view of Donald Trump, and that makes sense. You've got the ardent base. You've got the ones who, doesn't matter, he could shoot someone on Fifth Avenue, and they'd still vote for him. 62% unfavorable. Now you look at the Republicans, 7 in 10 view Trump as favorable. 6 in 10 say they want him to run again. So the Republicans have a real problem because those numbers, that doesn't bode well for a November election. But it does mean he's probably going to be their nominee, even if he's locked up. And here to share some thoughts on the most recent indictment, the hat trick. Not just a hat trick. He's now hit for the cycle. He's got all 4 indictments. And look, he wanted them. He got his 4th indictment, and here to share some thoughts on that, I've asked former Alabama Senator Doug Jones to come share some thoughts. Doug, thanks for taking time for us.
Rick, it is always good to be with you. Good to see you tonight.
So, what do you make of the 4th one? And a lot of people are saying this is the important one. What do you make of this 4th indictment?
Well, look. First of all, I think all of these are important, and we should not lessen any one of them. To be honest with you. And the one thing that I really want to stress to folks is that I read these indictments, particularly read this Georgia indictment. I know it's long, 98 pages, and the special counsel indictment involving January 6th, which is about 45 pages. Please take the time to read those, Rick. I mean, it's easy to listen to the media and try to explain it. But when you read that, I will tell you, when you read those, they complement each other. Incredible. It's amazing how they fit, and all the pieces of the puzzle seem to fit together, much like what we saw in the January 6th committee. It is breathtaking in its depth. And the other thing is, people read this indictment and they see the allegations. The thing I want people to remember is that the factual statements that they're making, they don't have to, especially these what they call overt acts. Overt acts don't have to be criminal conduct. They can be perfectly legal conduct standing on their own, but taken as a whole to commit an illegal means or an illegal object of a conspiracy, then that is what is known as an overt act. And all of this evidence appears to come from unindicted co-conspirators or Republican associates of Donald Trump, people that worked for him, people that were in the campaign, or Republicans like the Speaker of the House of Representatives in Arizona, the Georgia governor, the Georgia Secretary of State. This is not the deep state leftist socialist wokeism that is providing this evidence. These are the people that were surrounded, that Donald Trump surrounded himself with, and there are his text messages, and there is his emails. And so I really, it's an interesting place we are in this history where we have 4 indictments, but we've got a long way to go. And I think everybody should recognize that Donald Trump, just like everybody else that's been charged with a crime, is innocent until proven guilty. But the fact is that, forget whether or not it proves a crime. The facts alone, Rick, are pretty stunning. And I don't always agree with Mike Pence on everything, but I agree with him on this. Those facts alone should disqualify Donald Trump from being president of the United States.
And it's not just Pence saying it. The Federalist Society had a couple people coming out saying it. There have been a bunch of groups. But, you talked about the people who are, the rats who have jumped ship, so to speak. Those are the very best people, if you remember, because Trump only surrounds himself with the very best people. So it's interesting watching how the right is attacking the very best people for just coming out and telling what happened.
Yeah, they're telling what happened, and they appear to be consistent. If you look across the 2 indictments and compare that, people are forgetting all of the evidence, much of which we've seen before in the January 6th. It's all very consistent. Now, candidly, this evidence has not been tested by really good defense lawyers yet. That is going to happen. But they're really consistent on what was said and done and the factual chronology about what happened leading up to the election, just after the election, and just prior to and post January 6th. I think the thing that's newest about the Georgia indictment are the allegations concerning the Coffee County efforts to literally break into the voting machines. Rick, I told somebody the other day, I said, well, gosh, if you read all of this about what they were trying to do with this election, maybe all of those people on the ellipse on January 6th were yelling, so they were yelling, stop the steal. Maybe they weren't yelling to the president or with the president, they were yelling at him.
No, but look, to that point, I had said the same thing about Brian Kemp and Brad Brassenparger. I argued that they were trying to steal the election before the first ballot was ever cast because they were purging the voting rolls like crazy, hundreds of thousands of people being thrown off the voting rolls. And I was saying, look, Raffensperger isn't a hero in my view, just like I don't think Mike Pence is a hero in my view. They did what their job was. They did enough to keep themselves out of jail. And
they followed their oath, okay?
Right.
And at least on this, they did what they were supposed to do. They followed their oath. I told folks in my speech about when I gave my speech after announcing I was going to vote to impeach Donald Trump, that so many people were saying it was an act of courage. Well, courage, when you do the right thing, that shouldn't be an act of courage. It is just what you do to uphold your oath. And by the way, the Secretary of State's office in Georgia is still purging voters right now. Okay. Yep. That is still going on. I don't know how many, but it is alarming a lot of people in Georgia going into 2024.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's one of those things like my mother always said. When somebody's pointing a finger at you, they got three pointing back at them. And I find it interesting that when someone accuses you of doing something, it's what they're doing. Especially Trump, because he's got, I don't know what it is, but if it's something has been put into his ear, it's got to come out his mouth. So this idea that all this fraud's going on, it's got to be, in my view, because it's what they're doing.
Yeah, and you know what? The other thing about the Jack Smith and the Fonnie Willis indictments that they are showing consistently over and over and over is the false statements that Trump, Giuliani, and others were making about the election being stolen, about the fraud that was there, and how that was just one perpetual lie after another. And there's a telling comment that's in both of these indictments, and it came out in the January 6th, a comment that Donald Trump made to his then Attorney General Bill Barr, when he said that just announce that there's some irregularities, and me and the Republican members of Congress will take it from there.
Yep.
The same thing that he said to Vladimir Zelensky in Ukraine about opening an investigation of Hunter Biden. Just say you've got an investigation and don't worry about it. We will take it from there. That has been clearly a pattern here. And that's the kind of thing that I wish people would, that the Donald Trump supporters and others would focus on, to see that they've been being played. I mean, that is an admission that so many of these folks are being played. And, Rick, I want to say this too, because I've said this before. I think I've said something similar on your show. We talk about the 35% that are supporting Donald Trump, the overwhelming number of Republicans who want to see him renominated. I've got to say, having gone through a 2017 campaign against a guy who had some horrible allegations raised against him, there is an element to this that I think is often overlooked, and that is that people that have supported a public official do not want to believe that official is crooked. They don't want to believe allegations like this that are so horrible that public official has literally lied to them over and over and over, because it makes you feel bad. It makes you feel like a sucker. And so what I believe, and I may be wrong, as the evidence comes out, I think that there's going to be a significant turn. I don't know when that'll happen. It may not happen before the Republican nomination, but we did see it in January 6th. We saw the beginning of the cracks after the January 6th committee. And this is getting pretty serious with these allegations now. And it's hard to believe that this kind of activity happened in the United States of America.
No, I'm with you. But here's the thing. As you laid that out, my mind is going into this place of the people who are his most ardent supporters, the people who will defend him. He could literally shoot someone on Fifth Avenue and they wouldn't care. They're the ones who believe everyone in politics is corrupt and all of them are no good and all of them are lying, except that guy, which is the weirdest kind of thing for me.
It is. And he hooked them in, and he's not going to let go. They're not going to let it go. And there will be those. And as long as we've got human beings that are voting and not artificial intelligence, you're going to have that. And you can't really explain it. You just have to try to get as many people as you can out there with the message of what we've got to do to protect this democracy. And Donald Trump is clearly, again, even if he is acquitted on every one of these charges, what he did factually. And by the way, they're talking about freedom of speech. They think that's a defense, which it's really not a defense, but they're implicitly admitting that everything they said was not true. I have the freedom of speech to lie to the American people, even if it means I'm going to perpetuate a fraud on them. And so we got a long way to go, Rick. A long way to go.
Which is amazing to me. So are you looking forward to Monday when he comes out with his large, complex, detailed, irrefutable report that will be conclusive, and it's going to completely exonerate him, and then they're going to go after the riggers? Are you waiting for that big report?
Yeah, look, the irrefutable report that's already been refuted by Brian Kemp, the governor of Georgia. He's already said this was a fair election. So, I think it's going to be like most of the things that Trump has done when he set the stage like this. It'll be somewhat of a nothing burger.
I had someone email me and ask, why Biden hasn't chimed in on this, and why Biden won't talk about Trump. I responded. My response was, why would he? This is not his. He didn't do this. He's not directing this. He's got other things to do, like, I don't know, run the country.
Yeah, and the fact of the matter is, all of this is being discussed every day. It's being analyzed every day. And again, I go back to some personal experience. You didn't see me addressing all of the Roy Moore stuff in 2017. Other people were doing that. I wanted to get my message out. And I think that's what the president is doing. He's got a really strong message. And I know we're going to talk about that in a moment, probably. But that's what he needs to be focused on. The media, the indictments, the charges, he's not going to be able to control that narrative, but it's going to be out there. The information that needs to be out there about Donald Trump is going to be out there. And the thing to watch as we go forward with 18 defendants, who gets cold feet, who starts to talk about, you've already got some unindicted co-conspirators who have immunity to testify. There will be, I believe, based on my experience, I will be shocked if you don't see somebody among these 18 that decides to cut a deal. I'll be shocked if we don't see something.
Well, I mean, you've got the 18 named co-conspirators, and then there's, I guess, 30 unnamed co-conspirators. I mean, basically, she indicted half of the Republican Party. And look, if you look at what's going on with Rudy Giuliani, if you're one of those 30, you've got to be looking at your checkbook going, I can't afford this. If nothing else, if your love of country and of Constitution and democracy, if that doesn't call you to do the right thing, looking at your checkbook and going, no one's bailing me out paying my legal bills, that I think could have some, maybe it's just me, but I think that would have something to do with it.
Well, I think it will, but I think more than that, Rick, it is going to be the fear of a potential mandatory prison term upon conviction. And you got to remember, this is a fascinating charge, this racketeering charge. I've seen it used so many times, primarily in federal court, but it's very broad in Georgia, very broad. It encompasses a lot of different crimes that what you don't always think of in terms of racketeering. But this is so interesting because it goes from the president of the United States on down to fake electors in one state. It's really incredible. And you got to figure it, if you're on the bottom part of that totem pole there, in the bottom, very, very end there, what are you thinking? What are you thinking? You were loyal to a guy who's at the top, and all of a sudden, you're under an indictment. You're going to walk into and you're going to get booked. You're going to get fingerprinted. And all of a sudden you've got the state of Georgia versus X, fill in the blank. It maybe not as daunting as United States of America versus defendant X, but it's still pretty damn daunting.
No, jail is jail. I don't want to go to either state or federal prison. But you said a second ago there are people going to jail. Do you think it's possible he could be one of them?
Well, look, again, and I always qualify this, Rick. My prosecutor and defense lawyer comes out in me.
Yeah.
And because the presumption of innocence is a presumption of law. I mean, it is evidence to be considered. But so you can't ever predict the conviction. You don't know if he will end up testifying. I think that will be interesting to see. It's my understanding, and I haven't really read the Georgia code, but it's my understanding this may carry some mandatory prison time if he's convicted. I don't know. It is going to be very interesting to see. He cannot pardon himself.
Right.
There is. Here's my prediction, though. Here's what I think that people are going to need to be watchful of. In Georgia, you've got a 5-member commission that is supposed to, decide whether or not somebody can be pardoned. As I understand it, you're not even eligible for a pardon until 5 years has elapsed. It's going to be interesting to see if there are moves in the Georgia legislature to change that law, to make either to carve out some exceptions for that, to do something, to give it to the governor, to give it to somebody, to give it to the legislature, for God's sakes. I don't know, but it's going to be really interesting to see what that Georgia legislature, if they do anything with the pardon issue, the pardon laws in Georgia.
Would not be surprising. You listen to the Rick Smith Show with Doug Jones, former Alabama senator, talking about the cycle of indictments. I mean, this is pretty, to use a baseball term, he's hit for the cycle. He wanted the fourth one, he got it. So going to be interesting. But last on this, do you think the fact that Georgia has such, as you said, wide, wide net of laws and the kind of power to pull him in, do you think it's possible that if he starts doing his Twitter stuff and going after Fannie Willis and going after the judges and going after, do you think it's possible that they don't give him bail and bring him in?
Well, look, I think that they will give him bail initially. For certainly, I think he's due bail on these charges. But I think the court is likely to give him some admonishments, just like the federal judge did in D.C. They will give them a fair amount of leeway. Regardless, people say what they want to, but he's going to get a fair amount of leeway. It really depends on how much he wants to push this court and push the federal court. And remember, some of the witnesses in Georgia are the same witnesses that you'll see in the January 6th. The Jack Smith indictment as well. So, I think that Donald Trump needs to be very, very careful. I think you can attack the indictment. He could charge it being politically. He could say that it was fraud. He could do all these things without personally attacking. That's where you cross the line. When you start personally attacking the prosecutors, you start personally attacking the judges or any one of the witnesses. Especially the witnesses, that's where I think these judges are going to draw the line.
Now, last question I've got for you on this, because I've had a bunch of people say, well, it wasn't such a big deal now. Is there any way that, we can just, he admits, that he did some wrong things. Everybody just goes home and says, let sleeping dogs lie. Is there any world in which he walks away from this without standing trial, without, potentially being convicted and potentially going to any world that happens?
Well, look, there will be a lot of interesting legal motions that will be filed, motions to dismiss in all of these cases. And he's got very good lawyers, very, very smart lawyers, but so does the Department of Justice, and so does the DA's office. And so the first instance will be that. It will just be simply legal arguments back and forth, and it will be up to the judges. Those are very, very difficult for a defendant to win before a trial. Then you've got, if they do go to trial, whether or not there would be sufficient evidence for a jury to convict. That's another legal matter. So is there a world that he walks away? Of course, there's a world that's there. But I will tell you that history and odds are not in his favor of at least standing trial at some point, should he not accept some responsibility and try to cut a deal, which I do not see that world happening at all.
No, I don't see him cutting a deal. I don't see him pleading. I see him playing the victim card all the way to the very end, wherever that takes us. And we'll see. I got to change topics real quick because today's the 1-year anniversary of the Inflation Reduction Act. This, in my view, a huge piece of legislation helping us do a little bit on the climate front. Any thoughts? I mean, the president gave a good speech today. Any thoughts on the anniversary and what we're doing with it?
Look, I think that this is part of a package that the president of the United States has put forth, and accomplishment that he's done. I think if you put all these pieces together, it's really a remarkable thing that he's been able to accomplish. He has governed in a way that I don't think I've seen really in my lifetime. I mean, you've seen such incredible job performance, the economy getting, inflation coming down, maybe ticking back up just a little bit right now, But the fact of the matter is some of it's completely out of its control, like what Saudi Arabia is doing with oil prices and oil production. So I think, Rick, the thing that people have to remember, and those of us that have been in this political business for a long time will know this, it takes a good 6 months or more for the public to start feeling better about the good news that they are actually seeing for 6 months, but they just don't seem to feel it, in part because the media keeps talking, well, you've got this and you've got that. There is always a lag. And the president has had a process. He has worked it. And I think it is going well for him. And his numbers are starting to tick up. And I think you're going to continue to see that.
So if in 6 months you're talking the heart of re-election time, so you're thinking that could be a good swing for him.
There is no panic in the Biden campaign or folks like me that are Biden supporters that his numbers have not ticked up dramatically yet, because we have seen the experience that it takes a little bit to catch up. And I think as more people are focusing on Donald Trump's grievances and Joe Biden focuses on his accomplishments, you're going to see those numbers tick up considerably.
So not concerned about the Joe Manchin and the third way, no labels, all of this, because I just saw no labels is on 10 ballots in 10 states now. And I see you got the picture of RFK in the background, and his kook kid is out there running around.
Well, I think
any concern there?
I think RFK is just a stalking horse for Steve Bannon and the MAGA right. If you look at who's giving him money and those kind of things, it is people that want to hurt Joe Biden. The no labels thing is another issue that I just can't quite understand what they're doing, because they clearly will take votes away from Joe Biden. I think that's a threat. It's one that he can overcome, but clearly that has the chance of putting Donald Trump back in the White House. There's no doubt. There is no way, Rick, that a third party can win in this country right now. There's no way. And there's no way in the foreseeable future that anybody can get 270 electoral votes unless you're one of the two major parties, which means you could only potentially be a spoiler. And the fact that no labels is not disclosing their donors, they're not telling us who is funding the efforts to get on the ballots in those 10 states. It's going to be the same mega billionaires that are going to select the nominee. They keep talking about choice and giving people choice. Well, they're going to tell people who their choice is going to be for no labels. It's going to be selected in a smoke-filled room in some mansion in Georgetown, okay, by folks that you don't even know who it is. So we can't decide what their true motive might be. That's the fallacy of the no labels crusade right now. They need to just stop. They need to just stop and pledge that if Donald Trump's the nominee, that they're not going to do this because they can't win, which means they can only potentially be a spoiler. And if they're a spoiler, it's in favor of somebody like Donald Trump.
No, I'm right there with you. And the hope is that we as voters understand that. But Doug, as always, I appreciate you taking some time, sharing your expertise. Love to have you back again real soon, because none of this stuff's going away anytime soon.
No, it's not, but thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Doug Jones, former Alabama senator. Want to hear your thoughts? Email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. We'll take a quick break. Right back after this. Stick around.
It was 1,000-degree heat, creating fire cyclones going through buildings.
Maui fires now the deadliest U.S. wildfires in 100 years. Europe's drought deepens, impacting agriculture, shipping, and tourism. Plus,
climate change is the fight of our lives. It's the fight of my generation's life.
Montana judge sides with young activists in landmark, first-of-its-kind climate victory.
All of those victories will take them and more straight ahead. From BradBlog.com, I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
Stand by for 6 minutes of independent green news, politics, analysis, and snarky comments.
You know what the press will say? They'll say, Trump didn't look well. He was extremely wet. It's 104 or 5 degrees in this room, but we're okay with it, right?
Sure, yeah, we're okay with 104 or 5 degrees in New Hampshire. No problem. You know, Trump didn't look well. This is your Green News Report. Okay, Desi Doyen, fantastic news out of Montana. But before we get there, some still grim news coming out of Maui.
Yes, indeed. In Hawaii, the death toll from the Maui wildfires continues to rise, hitting nearly 100 as we go to air, making it the deadliest U.S. wildfire in a century. Search and rescue efforts are underway in the unprecedented blaze that all but obliterated the historic town of Lahaina. Fire crews are still working to contain 3 active wildfires on Maui. A massive mobilization of emergency and humanitarian aid is ongoing to assist the thousands of displaced survivors. The cause of the fires is still unknown, but a new class action lawsuit filed over the weekend alleges that Hawaiian Electric Industries failed to shut off electricity amid hurricane-force winds that knocked down power lines. Hawaii's Governor Josh Green said his office is also launching an investigation into the emergency response, into what happened, like why Hawaii's robust emergency warning system and communications failed, why fire hydrants didn't function, and much more. On MSNBC, Green also said the fire spread at the rate of a mile a minute and delivered a grim warning about the catastrophic effects of climate extremes.
It was a fire hurricane, and I want to warn the entire planet about this, all of America and all of the world. That's what a fire hurricane is going to look in the era of global warming. And so we have to all do right now what we can to stop global warming and reverse it.
Yeah, we do. Nice to have a governor who is not frightened to say so out loud.
Heads up, U.S. Gulf Coast. NOAA has announced a new revised hurricane forecast for 2023, warning that an above normal hurricane season is now likely due to record warm ocean temperatures in the Atlantic Ocean, providing heat energy.
Great.
Evidence links man-made global warming to the slowdown of the jet stream, causing weather systems like storms and hurricanes to stall over an area for an extended period, compounding the effects of torrential rains and floods. In other news, in Pennsylvania, officials say search and rescue crews have recovered 5 bodies from the rubble of an apparent house explosion over the weekend that destroyed and damaged nearby homes in Allegheny County. The cause is unknown, but leaky natural gas pipelines have caused previous explosions in the same area. In Europe, a new study warns that a multi-year severe drought is reducing crop yields, damaging natural resources, curtailing shipping on major rivers, and putting southern Europe's vital tourism revenue at risk. Europe's drought is also creating major energy shortages, with output from hydroelectric power plants falling due to lack of water. Nuclear power plants in France are also struggling to generate enough electricity without sufficient amounts of cool river water. A new study from the European Drought Observatory on Monday found more than a third of the continent is currently in drought. A different new study warns that Europe's groundwater reserves remain at a constant low, and that despite recent record deluges and floods, groundwater is being overdrawn at faster rates than can be replaced by rainfall. Finally, some good news. A Montana district judge has ruled in favor of 16 young Montana plaintiffs in a landmark climate lawsuit. The plaintiffs, aged 5 to 22, alleged that a new state law that prohibits agencies from even considering climate change impacts in their permitting decisions violates the children's rights under the state's constitution, which explicitly guarantees, quote, a clean and healthful environment. The ruling, in the first of its kind trial in the U.S., could influence how judges handle similar cases underway in other states. It also adds to the small number of legal decisions around the world that have established a government duty to protect citizens from climate change.
I like it, and I'm sure right-wingers out there who are so-called originalists, textualists, are delighted about the decision since it honors the words of the Montana Constitution. You're welcome. For much more on all of these stories and the ones we couldn't get to today, check out our website at greennews.bradblog.com.
Are you tired of think tank approved corporate news and commentary? Are you tired of CEOs telling you what to think, who to hate, and who to vote for? Well, welcome to the Rick Smith Show. We don't take orders from some boardroom, and we don't do focus groups or talking points. We don't work for them, and we never will. I'm Rick Smith, and I work for you. Join us daily at thericksmithshow.com and download the podcast and never miss a minute.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So I got to tell you, looking at the media coverage of the fourth Trump indictment, the New York Times grabbed my attention because their headline page, it's kind of like you got like a third of the column with the headline being "Indictment is in over bid to flip vote in Georgia." It doesn't even mention really Trump. If you didn't know, you wouldn't know what it is. Oh, that's just, who knows. But you would then be focused to the more important story, which is a teen sentenced to life is making a case for release. That's the important story for democracy right there. It's curious why that. Curious, the New York Times, who's supposed to be so liberal, so far, so anti-Trump. Curious how that happens. Anyway, here to share some thoughts on, the media coverage of the what I'm calling the cycle. Trump is now hit for the cycle. He's got four separate indictments, and he wanted all four of them. But I've asked Craig Harrington to come talk with us. Craig is the research director at Media Matters, MediaMatters.org, the website. Craig, thanks for taking time for us.
Yeah, thank you for having me again.
So what do you make of this headline? I mean, am I reading too much into this? I mean, because I'm looking at this, I'm going, it just doesn't fit with everywhere else where big, bold, Trump indicted, or it seems a little soft.
Yeah, there are a couple of things at play here. And I think to be charitable to the New York Times, they probably are assuming that their readers know who is being indicted. He's kind of the most famous person in the world, and his now criminal saga has dominated the news for most of the past, more than a year. This really began with some New York Times and Washington Post reporting in February, I believe, of 2022, when the Mar-a-Lago documents scandal first bubbled up into the public's view. I imagine they think that their readers know who was indicted. But also you do have to think they try to be a little heterodox with their headline writers. They try to kind of make a point with them. I apologize for that noise. They try to make a point with their headlines and try to not follow the pack. But you also do have to understand, the New York Times, they really do take that liberal bias criticism to heart. Yeah. And it does affect the way that they cover the news. And their political desk is frankly very conservative, small c conservative, but very conservative in its coverage of major news and scandals, particularly those involving their very outspoken Republican opponents, because they just don't want to fight with them. They don't want to be seen as being, a liberal rag. And as a result, by attempting so studiously to avoid politicizing their news coverage, they accept the Republican framing often and end up politicizing it just toward the Republican preferences. And I'd be remiss if I didn't remind your listeners of how the New York Times has covered Trump, rigorously and authoritatively, but not with the vindictiveness that we saw their coverage of Hillary Clinton's, email protocol usage. And it's important to realize that as much attention as this Trump story has gotten, and it has gotten a dominating amount of attention, I think it's probably on par with, whether or not Hillary Clinton used her work email or her private email for work and vice versa, which was unimportant in the grand scheme of things. 7 years hence, that was an unimportant thing that happened in American history, and it totally altered the course of human events and the trajectory of the 21st century because of how the New York Times covered that story.
You're absolutely right. But I look at this, and it's just soft. Mm-hmm. Indictment is in over bid to flip vote in Georgia. No, trying to overturn our democracy, trying to undo the sanctity of the ballot box. I mean, there could have been, I don't know, a little more sense of urgency, a little more sense of just how important this is, just how historic. No, it was a bid to flip the vote. That's all.
And, you know, the responses that we saw from Republican statewide officials in Georgia, you know, the response from Governor Kemp, the response from Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger, they didn't cut any corners or pull any punches because they're defending the sanctity of their own work, not just that Donald Trump came into their state and tried to overturn the election result that they believe that they ran fairly, because they did run it fairly. But, you know, they're defending themselves, and they're defending themselves against this accusation. And it's very interesting that his co-partisans, these are Republicans, these are people who will vote for him if he is the Republican nominee. And they're more defensive than the paper of record. Now, of course, the Times has done great reporting on Trump, and they'll continue to do great reporting on Trump. But, you know, these sort of headline gaffes that you see from the Times, or the sort of overly credulous acceptance of Trump's framing that you'll see oftentimes from outlets like the Associated Press, it really should never happen.
Yeah.
And it never happens. You know, the National Review, the Fox News, they never treat Democratic positions the way that New York Times treats entirely bad faith Republican positions, and particularly in the case of Trump. I mean, you know, he's innocent until proven guilty. But if someone applied to work for your radio show and they had a background check came back on them and it showed that they were under 4 separate federal indictments in 3 separate jurisdictions, facing 91 felony counts, not to mention their other criminal and civil misdemeanors in the past, including a jury in New York finding them liable for rape just a few months ago, you wouldn't hire that person. You wouldn't hire that person to
not only would I not hire him, Greg, I wouldn't let him in my door.
Yeah,
and yet you got 35% of the country going, he's our guy, we're going down with the ship.
Yeah, I mean, if he's the Republican nominee, there are tens of millions of people who are going to vote for him, and there's an entire media apparatus and the sort of symbiotic political and media apparatus that is the right-wing echo chamber that will support him to the hilt and all the way through.
And what has that?
It's just no one else would ever be treated that way.
No, you're absolutely right. And, you know, as you said, you know, had Hillary had just a little bit of that kind of treatment, we'd be a different country. But how has the right apparatus handled this 4th indictment, 91 felony charge? How have they handled it?
You know, this is actually somewhat fascinating. The severity of what Donald Trump stands accused of, and we can reiterate this, he's innocent until proven guilty in our system of justice. But the severity of what he stands accused of really is filtering into parts of the Republican base. We see that in Quinnipiac and Associated Press polling that has come out in the past, I think both of them were this morning or last night and today, where we saw that like very substantial majorities of the public, including majorities of people who identified as Republicans, said that they would not vote for someone who had been convicted of a felony, and that they believed that being convicted of a felony should make you invalid as a candidate for the presidency. That was coming, I think it was 58% of Republicans in one poll said that if you were a convicted felon, you shouldn't be allowed to be president. Not just that they wouldn't vote for you, but that it should be like banned. And so the severity of what he stands accused of, and the weight of the coverage, and the weight of the accusations and allegations, it really is filtering through. And next week, when we watch the Republicans debate for the first time, and it's not clear whether or not Donald Trump will actually attend that debate, but there are going to be, I believe, 4 people on that stage at the debate next week, because Mike Pence just qualified for the debate. There are going to be 4 people who, on that debate stage, who have said that Donald Trump was wrong, who have said up to that he committed crimes, or that they believe that he's guilty of the crimes he's accused of. And they're going to use that stage to take that case right into the Fox News echo chamber. They'll probably be booed. They'll probably spar with the hosts and the debate moderators. They'll probably be shut down by the other members on that stage who are there to defend Trump, like Vivek Ramaswamy, who's essentially just running a Trump campaign, more or less. But the right-wing media can't defend constantly against the barrage that Trump faces. Frankly, they're starting to give up under the weight of the pressure. We saw this earlier this afternoon. Guy Benson was being interviewed on Special Report on Brett Baer's program on Fox News, and he just seems sort of downtrodden. They're broken by this. They can't defend Trump because they know that he's guilty of a number of these instances. And so what they're doing is they are really redoubling their efforts to focus on pretend scandals affecting Joe Biden, almost all of which hinge on his son Hunter.
Yeah. Now, the breaking news today from the right media, since you brought that up, is that Trump said he's going to appoint a special counsel to investigate the Biden family and their corruption. So this is going to be, I guess, this is the re-election campaign. Re-elect me so I can go after Joe Biden. I mean, that seems to be all he's got at this point.
And of course, Trump did appoint this special counsel, the individual who was just elevated to the position of special counsel in the Hunter Biden investigation was a Trump appointee. Yeah. The U.S. Attorney for Delaware was appointed by Donald Trump specifically to investigate Joe Biden or Hunter Biden. And when President Joe Biden took the office, rather than firing that U.S. attorney, which is commonplace, you replace almost all U.S. attorneys. You let some finish up the work they're doing, and then you replace them with your own political appointees. This guy has been in that office for more than 3 years, entirely at the discretion of the White House. They have not touched that investigation. They have not interfered with it. They have allowed their appointed attorney general now to elevate that investigation to the level of special counsel. Joe Biden is just letting this witch hunt against his son go ahead. And Democrats are not defending Hunter Biden, who seems to be, he seems to be in some real stuff. Like, he was going through a really tough part of his life. But the things he stands accused of are pretty serious too. But they're nothing in comparison to Donald Trump. Hunter Biden is just a guy. He's a private citizen who seems to have made some serious mistakes in his personal life, and who has atoned for them how he could, legally and otherwise. But what the right-wing media wants you to do is they want to turn this into an email story, right? They want you to hear a cacophony of scandal when you think of Donald Trump. And you can't, it's just an amorphous scandal blob. You can't really attach anything to him. When you think about Joe Biden, they want you to think about Hunter, in the same way that when you thought about Hillary Clinton, you thought about emails. Yeah. And so with Trump, it was a million things, a myriad of things that you couldn't quite put your hand. You knew there was something iffy about him, but you didn't really know what it was because there were too many things to focus on. And what with Hillary Clinton, you could just say emails, and that's what happened in the media over and over again. And just as Trump's crime spree, it is affecting the GOP base. It is bleeding through, and it's filtering into their echo chamber. But at the same time, the right-wing media attempts to amplify Hunter Biden, to make him seem like, first of all, he's an important person at all, and also to make that scandal somehow stick to Joe Biden. Their efforts are working on the mainstream press. If you watch CNN, if you watch MSNBC, if you pick up a legacy newspaper every day, you'll see daily in the newspaper or hourly on mainstream cable news, you will see coverage of Hunter Biden. And right-wing media are working the refs, and they're complaining to the refs because it works. And so far they have successfully sort of tarnished Biden's presidency with a scandal that literally doesn't exist and is not part of his administration, but that he's been forced to answer for, and that he'll have to spend the next year answering for, because that's how the sort of both sides media works.
Yeah, no, it's crazy where we are. You're listening to the Rick Smith Show. We're with Craig Harrington. He's the research director over at Media Matters. You can check out their website, MediaMatters.org. We'll get links out on social media. I want to flip this around. Today's the anniversary of the Inflation Reduction Act. President gave I thought was a good speech for him, talking about issues that speak volumes to me, and the need to reshore manufacturing and get into those places that have been forgotten. Any thoughts on the spiel today and the 1 year anniversary?
Yeah, it was actually as a theater critic, right? The media rollout for the White House's anniversary has actually been pretty robust. They've spent several days building up to this. They spent the last several weeks trying to land the Bidenomics message in the public media, and they've more or less had some success getting that picked up because they knew they were leading up to today and the anniversary of this big legislative package that they passed, the Inflation Reduction Act, which is very likely to be the last major legislation of President Biden's first term in office. And it's important to realize that on August 16th of 2022, so the day that the Inflation Reduction Act was signed by the president, and a couple of weeks after it had passed in the Congress, inflation was at 8.5%. Today, 1 year after the Inflation Reduction Act was signed and enacted into law, inflation is at 3.2%. And Democrats are trying to make that case. The White House is trying to make that case. Obviously, right-wing media refuse to acknowledge reality. If you watch Fox News, if you read any Trump-aligned outlets, or even the sort of DeSantis-aligned outlets like the National Review, they all claim that the economy is in a tailspin and that we might be on the verge of recession if we're not already in recession. They keep highlighting that inflation is out of control, even though it's not. And the mainstream media are struggling to tell this story because it's so easy to point to polling that shows high levels of economic anxiety. So when you ask individuals, particularly Republicans in response to polls, how their economy is doing, how they're doing personally and financially, if their conditions have improved in the last year, they say, of course. And if you asked about the broader economy, this is particularly true of Republicans, but it's somewhat true of everyone else. They say that the whole economy is off track, but personally, they think they're
I'm doing great. Everybody else,
fine.
Everything else sucks.
Yeah,
no, because look, I struggle
with
this as well.
Bias.
I struggle with this as well, Craig, because look, I think Joe Biden is taking us in the right direction.
Mm-hmm.
I think we're moving away from neoliberalism and allowing corporations to go and move overseas. The idea that we're reshoring manufacturing, all that's great stuff. The fact that we're bringing back Davis-Bacon protections so workers can enjoy better wages. All of this stuff is good stuff, but I still understand that people are struggling. That homelessness is on a rise. Credit card debt's on the rise. Mental health is problems are on the rise. Suicide rates are on the rise. We've got problems, but we've got to have solutions and a direction other than, well, it's all Joe Biden's fault. It's not, but it's something that has to be addressed.
As a very proud Ohio State Buckeye, it pains me to shout out University of Michigan professor Justin Wolfers, but he's an economist who is quite media savvy, and he's been making it a point about this for many months, and he deserves attention for almost single-handedly trying to turn this narrative around in mainstream media, particularly on cable news. But for months, he's been going on television and talking about how all of the indicators we have show that the economy is on the right track and that things are improving. And the public still doesn't believe that that is true, in part because they're not being told that story by the media. You don't have the same number of stories about like how inflation has improved, or like how eggs are super affordable, or how milk is super affordable. Whereas a year ago or 18 months ago, CNN had that infamous Texas family that buys 12 gallons of milk a month, and they were suffering over $90 of increase in their monthly milk budget or things like that. That story got a ton of attention. You had the stories where journalists would go out and stand next to a gas station and point the camera at the price gauges and show you that, prices are out of control. But you can't do the opposite of that. You can't go to a gas station and point a camera at it and say like, well, look, gas is $3.68, and that's fine, and we're all comfortable with that. And part of it is that the media was so invested in inflation and in looming recession and in economic catastrophe because, if it bleeds, it leads. Yep. That's a good story. People were watching that.
Anger sells.
People don't want to be told. Yeah, absolutely. People don't want to be told that things are getting better. But then at the same time, there is a sort of sunk cost here, right? Like inflation has been dramatically improving steadily for a year. All of the trajectories show that it will likely steady and improve and maintain a baseline going into the future. All of the economists who were forecasting a recession in 2023 or in 2024, all of them have revised their data and are now arguing that a recession is unlikely. The Atlanta Federal Reserve Bank has a GDP forecaster that showed that they expected quarter three GDP to be 5.8% growth, which is like, those are China numbers. That is a shocking growth rate for an entire quarter in the economy. That is not a recession. And Professor Wolfers during his appearances often jokes like, if we're in a recession, this is the worst recession ever. It's just not recessioning. But what people do remember is there is a legacy of these impacts, right? Like if you had wages growing at a rate that was below inflation for about 18 months, which was the case in the United States, you need to earn back sort of the area underneath that chart, right? The amount of wages that fell behind is a certain amount, and we haven't quite gained all that back. Now, the Biden administration is telling everyone that we will get right by 2024, that we're ahead of schedule and the economy is on the right track. And Democrats certainly believe that, at least a majority do. Independents are beginning to come around. But in public polling, Republicans just refuse to acknowledge that the economy is on the right track. And that's why you see these big numbers, these sort of stubborn numbers in public polls that keep getting covered by the Times and by CNN over and over and over again, where they say, well, the public says that the economy is still doing poorly. If you break down that polling, it's always the Republicans who refuse to accept that the economy has improved, or potentially they just represent a different demographic and it hasn't improved for them, though that's unlikely. They refuse to acknowledge that the economy has improved because their guy isn't in office. I guarantee you, if Donald Trump was the president today, Republicans would be saying that the economy was great, because they've been trained to sort of make this a partisan issue by their own media apparatus, and that's an area where the news coverage just hasn't caught up. Every time you see a poll about the state of the economy, that news article almost never breaks down the fact that if you break into crosstabs, you'll see independents are more or less split on the economy. Democrats think the economy is doing pretty well. And then 90% of Republicans tell you that the economy is doing poorly. And they're doing that because, like, it's a political message for them. They refuse to accept that Joe Biden can do anything right. And it shows up in these stories that then have their own inertia.
Yeah. Now, for me, I look at what Biden's doing, and I love the fact that he's addressing the idea of wages, on how they have to come up, and not just with rhetoric. I mean, I talked about the Davis-Bacon thing that they just came out with the last week sometime, saying, hey, we're going to go back to the original intent of the Davis-Bacon law to ensure that prevailing wages are paid to more workers, so that more workers have the opportunity to make better wage hours conditions, but also that the NLRB is moving backward towards the Joy Silk doctrine. That says, look, when you vote for a union, or when you sign a union card, you get the majority of people to sign up, you start negotiating. You don't go through 3, 4, 6 months of harassment and intimidation. This is a very pro-union move and a very pro-worker move, and something that I haven't seen virtually anywhere, except a couple of the places that I check. But this to me is, especially for union members, is a huge deal.
Yeah, and I mean, we're in the midst of sort of union summer in the United States. It's one of the most prominent and influential and recognizable unions in the United States. The Screen Actors Guild is on strike in solidarity with their writers, who have been on strike and plan to continue striking for months. We saw prominent railroad strikes. We've seen strikes or threats of strikes and continued organization in the gig economy, at major retailers. There's always a sort of looming unionization effort that you see from like big box retailers like Amazon. And you see this gaining steam because people have come to realize that the unions, that the labor movement broadly, and that unions in particular, offer them a real opportunity to get ahead through collective action. Media Matters has unionized, and when I was a member of the bargaining unit, I was very proud to help organize Media Matters. Several years ago. We were kind of the leading edge of the sort of union movement among younger workers, and now it's something that's bleeding out into all sectors of the economy and all industries, and it's a good thing for workers. And it's not an accident that this happens after the disruptions of COVID and after the economic turmoil that we saw over the past 3 years, because workers realized they needed to band together, and they're doing so, and they are realizing some of these gains that have been made available in this economic environment. And part of the reason that we're starting to see this kind of proper stabilization of things and wages really beginning to rise is because workers have power and they can make demands. Yep. And they're finally realizing that.
As soon as they realize that they actually have power, maybe things turn around. And as I've been saying, had we all had contracts that had cost of living adjustments in them, as my grandparents' generation had, maybe the inflation that we did suffer under wouldn't have been as painful. And again, this is another one of those things for me. But Craig, as always, I appreciate the time, the thoughts, the expertise, and the work that you guys do over at Media Matters. Thanks so much. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.
I want to hear your thoughts. Email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. What are your thoughts? The economy doing well? Are things going in the right direction? How is your economy? That's what I want to hear. Email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Quick break, right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk. I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2 on On this day in labor history, the year was 1937. That was the day that the U.S. Congress passed the National Apprenticeship Act. It was also known as the Fitzgerald Act. The purpose of the act was to, quote, formulate and promote the furtherance of labor standards necessary to safeguard the welfare of apprentices. Apprentices are workers learning a skill set. They are typically paid less than skilled workers or journeymen during the course of their training. Apprenticeship programs are especially found in the building trades, where learning skills like plumbing or electrical work might take years of dedicated training. But before the protections of the 1937 Act, there was no national standard governing apprenticeship programs in the United States. This led some apprentices to be exploited. In 1911, Wisconsin became the first state to pass legislation to structure the apprentice system. In the 1920s, multiple labor unions advocated for national apprentice standards to promote fairness and safety for workers. Recognizing the need for national apprentice guidelines, President Franklin Delano Roosevelt commissioned a committee to study the issue. They were tasked with developing training standards for apprenticeship programs. The 1937 law gave the committee the authority to complete their job. The Committee on Apprentice Training became a permanent part of the U.S. Department of Labor. The Bureau of Apprenticeship works with state governments to ensure the fair treatment of apprentices. Today, apprenticeship programs provide classroom and on-the-job training to help develop a skilled labor force. In 2015, 52,500 participants graduated from registered apprenticeship programs. Nearly 500,000 workers participated in apprentice training programs, learning skills that will build their financial security.
Ohio voters scored a big election victory for women's rights last week. It was a tricky vote, too, deceptively couched as a statewide referendum to approve a little technical change in the procedure for approving statewide referendums. How boring. But Ohioans figured out that it really was a big vote on an underhanded ploy by right-wing Republicans to block the right of women to make their own reproductive decisions. Not boring. So, in a huge turnout, a whopping 57% of voters said yes to women and no to the tricksters. Yet the referendum actually did encompass a procedural issue that's an even bigger political story than the election results, namely, the GOP's ongoing attempts to rig election rules so its extremist minority can, quote, win without getting a majority of the votes. Background. A state constitutional amendment guaranteeing the right to abortion is already set to be voted on this November in Ohio. Right-wing Republican leaders, though, fear that more than half of Ohioans will support that amendment. Thus, last week's referendum was their desperate attempt to win by losing, specifically by decreeing that, hocus pocus, constitutional initiatives must get 60% approval to become law. Yes, a 40% minority of voters could nullify the majority will of the people. This is Jim Hightower saying this gaming of the system by devious Republican officials and far-right extremists has become their core political strategy across the country. It's actually a deeply embarrassing admission by them. They are conceding that they are now captives of ideological extremism and outright nutballism, making their party so completely out of touch with the American majority that they can't win honestly. So they've become the anti-democracy party, acting as rabid political veterinarians out to fix democracy by neutering the power of the people.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
1-866-416-RICK, 1-866-416-7425. You got a question, comment, something on your mind? Want to hear it? Let's go to the phones. Got Jack in Wisconsin on one. Jack, how are we doing today?
Yes, peachy keen, thank you, Rick.
What's on your mind, brother?
I listened to the Biden speech the other day, and it was a very good speech. Biden needs to do this more than once every 6 months or once a month. He needs to do it or have some surrogates doing this every single week, if not every single day. They need to point out that the economy is improving. Many people's wage increases are beating inflation. Inflation, of course, is on the way down. That is a fact. And he's done an awful lot, not just for the economy, but for infrastructure. This needs to be emphasized. One of the things that seems to be flying under the radar to me is the fact that there are serious Republican attempts in Congress to undermine this and to damage Biden as much as possible. There's Tuberville supposedly holding up the appointment of the heads of, what is it now, the Army, the Marines, and the Navy, I think.
Yeah, hundreds of promotions.
And of course that has that cascading effect. Exactly right. And I can see this happening, that when the election comes around and any Republican candidate's going to say something like, "Oh, Biden, he's the commander in chief. Why doesn't he have heads for these armed forces?"
Yeah.
And of course, the fact that a Republican sabotaged that is going to be pushed under the table. Similarly, there's the threat to not have a budget by September 30th, which would again trash the economy. It had when they had debt issues, it did a pretty good number on the economy as well. And my personal opinion on this, we go back as far as Ronald Reagan in 1981. I think at his inauguration address, that government isn't the answer, government is the problem, and then instituted this wonderful thing called trickle-down economics, which has never worked. And then later on, there was another Republican, I don't remember who it was, that said, we want government small enough to drown in a bathtub.
That would have been that'd be Grover Norquist.
Yeah, that's right. Basically, the whole idea of this is the Republicans have got only one real major platform, and that is give trillions away to their billionaire buddies and huge corporations in terms of welfare tax rates. And they have nothing else to sell, so they're going to have to try to damage the government as much as possible. Doesn't make any difference if it hurts us in terms of the individuals, in terms of the country, in terms of our international ability to do things like support Ukraine. They're going to do anything they can to just damage the Democrats. Their idea is break the government and then blame the Democrats.
Yeah, no, I mean, they ran on, this is the thing that's always curious to me, Jack. They run on saying the government can't do anything, shouldn't do anything, the government's horrible, and then they set out to prove that government doesn't work, and then people still vote for them. That's the part that's always curious to me.
Yeah, it's always, people seem to be voting against their best interests in many cases if they vote for Republicans, and I'm going back to the past. But right now, the Republican Party has ginned up this incredible tribalism that it doesn't make any difference who the candidate is. They're going to vote for anybody with an R after their name on the ballot. And people, and we've got many people who have been sold on this idea, January 6th, no big deal, nothing happened. Well, yeah, in fact, several people lost their lives. We almost lost our government on that date. But they have been fed this line of baloney from extremist media that says, oh, it was no big deal. Some of the senators saying, oh, it was just a normal tourist visit. Excuse me? I don't think so.
Yeah, because, of course, there are normal days when people take a dump on the desk. Happens all the time.
Yeah. We have about a third of the country that is just, they're in this tribal cult. And how we get around that, I do not know. That's my biggest problem. And we have one more problem, and that is Joe Biden is not a young man anymore. And my son always votes, and he's in his 20s. But there are a lot of young people that don't really want to vote for Biden because he's too old for them. That's their only objection, so they won't vote. We've got to get these people out, and we've got to make them see, hey, this is your future. You're going to live to see it. I won't live to see the worst effects of climate change. I won't live to see very much of the fascism if the Republicans take over. But these kids will.
Yeah.
We've got to somehow get them awake and aware, and out to vote, and to vote these Republican crazies out.
I'm with you, Jack. I appreciate the call, buddy. Thanks so much. He's not wrong. Look, at the end of the day, we've got to figure out how to motivate people to get out and to vote. And look, I'm looking at Biden as the best option at this moment. He wasn't my first choice, but as I've said, he's done much better than I ever imagined, because in my view, we're moving away from all of the stuff that Jack talked about that moment. The supply side voodoo Reaganomics, that whole neoliberal agenda that got us to where we are. Now the point here is, how do we talk to each other? How do we get out of our silos? Because he's right. Look, there's a third of the country, wearing the red hat, saying, everything on the other side is horrible. But understand, you've got some on the other side with the blue hat saying the same thing. For instance, I'm on a listserv of a whole bunch of activists. I want to keep track of what activists are doing around the country. So I'm on a bunch of these email lists and a bunch of these things where I'm on right-wing ones as well, because I want to see what they're saying. Today, what caught my attention was there's a song on the right wing that they're now making the new anthem. It's this guy Oliver Anthony had an acoustic song, not really my kind of music, but he had a song that called "Rich Men North of Richmond," and it's really a working class kind of call to action, if you will. It can be viewed that way. When I'm looking at this, the lyrics to this song, I'm seeing a working guy who's getting screwed and tired of it and is angry. And as I've been saying, the pain, the frustration, the struggle, the anger in these communities across the country is real. The person who figures out how to tap in and make those people's lives better is the party who figures this out. They're going to have loyal voters again. They're going to have loyal voters for years to come. You look back to the New Deal era under FDR. You had FDR Democrats for, even today, you got people who call themselves FDR Democrats because of the policies, because of what they did, the lives they made better. So as I'm reading through the lyrics of this song, because I'm reading the listserv and I'm hearing, oh, it's racist, it's homophobic, it's all this stuff. It's anti, this, it's against black women, it's all this. Whatever colored glasses you were wearing at the time when you heard this song, that's what they picked out of this. And it's frustrating to me because I understand people are struggling. So now I'm not going to pretend that I know what this guy was thinking by some of the things he said. But, at the beginning, he says, look, I've been selling my soul, working all day, overtime hours for BS pay. So I can sit out here and waste my life away, drag back home, and drown my troubles away. This is a working person who is struggling to make ends meet. This is someone who's having a tough time. He says it's a damn shame what the world has gotten to for people like me, people like you. Wish I could wake up and it not be true, but it is. He says, living in the new world with an old soul, these rich men north of Richmond, and he's talking about people in D.C. Lord knows all they want to do is have total control. Want to know what you think, want to know what you do, and they don't think you know, but you know you do, that kind of stuff, because your dollar ain't blank, and it's taxed to no end because of the rich men north of Richmond. He said, I wish politicians would look out for miners, like the people going down in the ground, and not just miners on some island. And Lord knows folks in the street ain't got nothing to eat, and the obese milk and welfare. Well, God, if you're a 5'3", you're 300 pounds, taxes ought not to pay for your bag of fudge rounds. Young men putting themselves 6 feet underground, because all this damn country does is keep kicking them when they're down. This is someone who's angry at what has happened to working people in this country. Now, I find it interesting he goes after welfare recipients and not corporate ones. He goes after, and what's interesting is everyone's, well, he's talking about black women. I didn't hear that. It could be the people that he sees in trailer parks too, because white people are poor and living in horrible poverty conditions. And the narrative is, well, they're just sucking off the government teat. Policy-wise, there are a ton of things we should be doing to help folks who are struggling. But this to me seems, and now the right's going to pick this up as an anthem and do exactly what the left wants them to do. And this is the weird spot for me that I'm in, because it seems like, now it's pushing this on them that they're going to defend it. And for me, it's, I see the pain. I see the fact that he's struggling. And he's mad. And he's mad at other poor people, which is weird. Like I said, brings up welfare, milk and welfare. Never mentions the corporations who are paying him the BS wages. I mean, there are real things to argue about this song, none of which are the things that are divisive to us. And for me, there is a way to reach people. When we did our Working Class Heroes tour and we went through Wisconsin, we went through Iowa, we talked to people who, they're angry. They believe that they're being feed and taxed enough to already. They believe that the government isn't there to help them, because you've had a Republican Party for so long who will do nothing for them and tell them, look, we're doing nothing for you. Screw you. You're on your own. We're going to get you pay or die health insurance. That's the best you're getting out of us. And you've got a Democratic Party who's going, well, you're over there. You're run by red states and red governors who refuse to help you. What do you want from us? And they feel angry and they feel left out. I'll tell you, we went through Iowa, and Iowa, for me, was a major wake-up call. I've always thought this way, and I've always believed, when we deindustrialized, the jobs that were lost and the families that were broken and all that stuff, I've always been there. But it wasn't until we went through Iowa and we saw the devastation of communities and the fact that these people are struggling to maintain their dignity. Because look, nobody wants to admit that they're struggling. Nobody wants to admit that they're having a hard time. They want the pride that comes with being able to make their way. And I'd say the same thing about people on welfare. Look, when I was a kid, I don't remember people celebrating the fact that they needed food stamps. One of the most traumatic, if I have any trauma, one of the most traumatic moments of my life was having to go to a store and use food stamps, the clown money they used to give you, and the woman behind the counter just humiliating an 8-year-old child. That should happen to no one. You should be able to take no one's dignity away. And this is what these folks are feeling. And I guess I understand it a little bit better than my friends who wear the blue hat all the time. The best way, I think, to deal with some of this is to actually reach out to people. So everyone goes, well, how do we do that? By admitting that their struggles are real. By admitting that, in the past, bad decisions were made. Owning up to failures. And talking about how we make that better. And I think Biden today in his speech did some of that. I watched his speech today, and it was like something that I would have written. Because he did hit on those themes. He did talk about communities that were left behind. Because he said, look, I'm asked all the time, why are you investing in red states? Why is any of this money going there? And look, I've said it before. He's a better man than I am. I could be as vindictive as anybody else. But he's saying, look, it's about all of the country. And it's about those places that are hit hardest. It's about those places that are struggling to find their identity, their pride. And look, the reason I like this guy so much is because I think he gets that. I think he gets that on a visceral level. It's not something you can fake. So for me, as I've said, I'm guardedly optimistic about what the future is going to bring us. I'm hoping that we continue on the path that we're on. And I hope come 2024, we stay the course. Want to hear your thoughts? Email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. I'm going to take a quick break. Right back after this to wrap things up. Stick around. I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1894. That was the birthday of the longtime leader of the AFL-CIO, George Meany. Meany grew up in the Bronx with his Irish Catholic family. His father was the president of the United Association of Plumbers and Pipe Fitters. Meany left school at the age of 16 and signed on as an apprentice with the pipe fitters. 10 years later, he was elected as the youngest member of the union's executive board. Within 2 years, he entered full-time union work, becoming a business agent. In 1934, he took the reins as president of the New York State Federation of Labor. 5 years later, he became the secretary-treasurer of the American Federation of Labor. At the AFL, Meany played an important role in the international labor movement. He helped to form the International Confederation of Free Trade Unions at the end of World War II. Meany then became president of the AFL in 1952. As president, Meany helped to lead the merger of the AFL and the CIO in 1955. The merger brought 15 million working people together into one association. Meany was known for his anti-communist positions and for having little patience for union radicalism. He was vocal in pushing for protections against employment discrimination in the historic 1964 Civil Rights Act. He also supported the passage of the 1970 Occupational Safety and Health Act. The act brought safer workplace standards to millions of workers throughout the country. Meany became the face of the labor movement, quite literally. Twice he appeared with his trademark cigar on the cover of Time magazine. He remained at the helm of the AFL for a quarter of a century, retiring in 1979. He died in 1980, but he will be remembered as one of the nation's strongest voices for human and civil rights. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. Welcome back to The Rick Smith Show. Check out our website, thericksmithshow.com. So, story on Friday that I didn't catch until Monday that got almost... I didn't see any real national coverage of this, but evidently a 3-year-old child died on a bus going from Texas to Chicago because of Greg Abbott's, what are they calling that now? Operation Lone Star. It's where they're busing up a bunch of migrants and they're shipping them to Democratic cities. In fact, last week it's been reported that according to Mexican officials, that 2 people drowned in the Rio Grande. Including a child, and I guess their bodies got caught up in these floating barriers that have look like giant bandsaw or circular saw blades. And I'm going, wow, the level of cruelty. Now they don't know what killed this 3-year-old child, and it goes to show how screwed up our immigration policies are. It goes to show how screwed up our political system is, that we can't get something at all done. But it does show me that the party who cares about the children, because they love the children, the pro-life people, not so much. And, they've covered their behind. Evidently, waivers were signed, and they're claiming it's all purely voluntary. Just not how you treat people. And look, I've said before, I don't have the answer on the immigration issue. I don't. I'm not someone who says you swing the doors open, but I'm also someone who says you can't slam the door shut. We need policies that are going to help people want to stay home. Some of that helpful. But this, I don't know. The amount of money being wasted on all of this is frustrating. Now, a governor who I think is doing good things. I look at Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro, who just the other day signed into law a universal breakfast program for all children in the Commonwealth. That is a good thing. And I guess we're going to have universal lunch program as well. That's universal breakfast is happening. Now it'd be great if we could go the full rest of the way. Which I believe that is part of this, breakfast and lunch. And they estimate that this is going to help 1.7 million kids in the Commonwealth, 1.7 million kids. That's an important thing, and I'm thrilled to see that. Good on Josh Shapiro. And finally, leaky Rudy. Evidently, Rudy Giuliani and his legal team are claiming Rudy's broke. He's selling his apartment because he's got legal fees to pay. And what I find interesting is I was looking through some of the costs. I'm going, man, being Donald Trump's friend is really expensive. Being his lackey, really expensive. Evidently, he's been saying their bills $90,000 in sanctions from a judge in one defamation case, $20,000 monthly fee for data hosting because of all the things that he's got himself into, $57,000 in unpaid phone bills, $89,000 in legal bills, just over the case with the two Georgia poll workers, and then the list goes on. I mean, the guy's just. He's hair dye deep in bills, and you know who's not helping him? And there's where the poetic justice is for me, because again, I look at someone like Donald Trump, and I've known con artists like that before. They never reach into their pocket. Everything's on the arm. Everything is somebody else's responsibility, and that when you get into trouble, they just mosey on down the road. And if you were one of the best people that got suckered into being part of Trump's world, I have no sympathy for you whatsoever when he refuses to help you with the legal costs. And this, I think, is going to play into the thought process of all of the unnamed co-conspirators, and some of the named ones as well. Because here's the one thing that everyone knows. Legal costs really expensive, unless you're going to get some fresh. You're going to get cousin Vinny to come defend you, and you're going to get your first case. It's going to be expensive, and these legal bills they mount, and it's going to be interesting to see how many people actually do flip because they can't afford to defend themselves. Now, as I said earlier, I wish it were about democracy. I wish it were, hey, he broke the law. He has to be. I wish it were the high-minded stuff. I wish it were, the right and wrong. Because again, these are the Republicans have always framed themselves as the paternalistic, law and order, black and white, good and bad, right and wrong. It's them. Yeah, and then to have this is, well, curious. So I do find it interesting that Rudy broke. I also find it interesting that he's being named in a RICO indictment, considering that he made his name and his millions, because of his use of the RICO Act when he was, putting away mobsters in New York. There's got to be a movie. There's got to be a documentary about Rudy. There really does. I have no explanation on how you go from super prosecutor to America's mayor to now indicted co-conspirator. That's worth, that's worth an afternoon movie, isn't it? That's worth something. And maybe he can get some royalties out of it and help pay his legal bills. Because I'll tell you one thing I know, Trump's not going to help him. There's no help there. Want to hear your thoughts. Are you going to be paying attention to and how do you keep up with all four trials? That's what I want to know. But I want to hear your thoughts. Email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Thanks so much for tuning in. As always, if you miss any portion of the program, make sure you grab the podcast. Wherever you find your favorite podcast, you can find ours. We'll see you back here next time.
You've been listening to The Rick Smith Show. Email Rick at rick@thericksmithshow.com. Until next time, this has been The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk.